What is up, everybody? WaffleDragon34 here, and today we're answering your musical questions. A couple months ago, I asked my Discord community if they had any questions on guitar, music, writing, anything like that, and they definitely had a couple. So today we're going to go through those. And if you have any questions on anything like that, feel free to go join the Discord. It's in the link in the description. And feel free to drop a question in the musical Q&A section. It's at the very bottom of the Discord in the Stream Stuffs channel. But anyway, let's get into the first question. So this question is from Damnation on YouTube, asking, could you do a tutorial for drop tuning, where I have to pay attention and so on? So what they're asking about is drop tuning. I have switched guitars here, so I can make it a little more obvious, but this guitar is a headstock. Whenever someone says drop tuning, all they mean is essentially they're taking the lowest string of their guitar, which on this guitar is an E, and they're dropping it down 2 whole steps. Typical guitars will be tuned to E standard, which is E, A, D, G, B, and E. And with this low string here, that's where you kind of get those chugs and those, like, you know, very low and fun parts. So for example, this guitar right now is tuned to E. So that note's an E, right? If I drop tune it, I've got my tuner right now, so unfortunately I have to do it by ear a little bit. But essentially, now this note is a D instead of an E. And the nice part is that is when you're doing power chords, instead of having to do the whole power chord shape, you can now do a bar chord on those lower strings. Like for that riff, if I wanted to do that on a standard tuning, so I go back to... which again, I've just been able to do this from years and years of playing. Now to do... I don't have that ability to kind of never pull off those chords. So that's essentially what drop tuning means. And if your guitar is tuned differently, if this was tuned to D standard instead, it would be a D note here. And if I dropped it, that'd be a C. So then you have D drop C. So basically, whenever you hear me say that, like a D drop C or drop D or drop tuning, that's all I'm really doing. I'm taking the low E string of this guitar and I'm dropping it down a whole step, which is 2 frets essentially. And that's that question. So moving on to the next question. This one comes from Magical Girl Jade in the Discord. A video on popular scales for metal would be cool. Minor, harmonic minor, Phrygian dominant, etc. Yes. The good old question of the scales and all the forms and all of that. I'm going to break this down as I learned it, because the way I kind of approach scales is, it's not unique, but essentially I do it based on a lot of math, which is kind of, I'm an engineer outside of playing guitar, so it kind of makes sense. And as an engineer, the best way I could explain all of this is using the one and only Microsoft Excel. So essentially we're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way down and kind of explain the whole process of creating a scale, figuring out scales, and working on them. I'm going to save the modes for another video because that's a very in-depth topic and it's going to require a lot of work. But for anyone who's just wondering what a scale is in terms of musical context, a scale takes any of the 12 notes of music that we have available to us in typical music, which is basically A to G with a bunch of sharps built into it. Just for further context for anyone who's watching this video, the 12 notes of music are A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F sharp, G, and G sharp. There's no B sharp and there's no E sharp. That's just because how music's figured out. You see a piano, you notice that 2 of the keys don't have a black key between them. That's why we just don't have those notes. So you could play all 12 of those notes and if you write your music in that context, it could work. You have to write your music in a context. And what I mean by that is some notes work well with each other in certain ways. Some notes will be sounding dissonant, and some notes have issues. So what musicians have done is we essentially developed scales. Now scales take those 12 notes and they take 7 of them and they put them in a relation to each other in such that you can then use it to write music. So whenever you hear someone saying, oh, I'm using a C major, I'm using a C harmonic minor, I'm using a C this or C that, they're just telling the other musician that they are using these 7 notes to write this song or play this section or solo in this. So that begs the question, how do you figure that out? You know, if you're a musician, someone comes to you and says, can you solo in C major? What does that mean? You know, what does that mean? What am I doing now? And the way that you figure that out is essentially using these formulas. Now, again, I'm an engineer, so I think very math-focused, so I've broken it down. I'm going to explain how to do this in the formula stance. So what I'm showing on Excel right here is the two formulas for the major and minor scale. In typical typical music you're going to hear, a lot of things will use the major or minor scale. That's the main things you will hear. There are variants, of course, but you will typically use the major or minor to write music if you're from the United States and most of the other world, but there's other... I don't want to get too crazy into that. So I'm going to have to explain one more piece of terminology, and that is a whole step and a half step. Now, again, like I said, in music, you have notes, and the distance between the notes is considered a step. So if you're going from A to A sharp, that's considered a half step. And if you look on piano, A and A sharp are next to each other. That's so you can kind of visualize. I wish I had a piano in front of me, but I don't. You can kind of visualize that as a half step. On a guitar, a half step is essentially moving one fret. So right now I'm on the A, which is the 5th fret of the E string. By going a half step to A sharp, I am now on the 6th fret of the 6th string of the E string, and that's a half step. A whole step is the same idea, but it's now 2 frets or 2 notes. So a whole step is just 2 half steps, which makes sense. Half is half of a whole. So now if I'm on the A on the E string, the 5th fret, I'm gonna do a whole step. I'm now on the 7th fret, which is that B. So now I went A sharp, B. So one more time. Half step is 1 fret. Whole step is 2 frets. Just like that. So with music, we essentially use this formula to develop the scales. So for the major scale, the formula is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So WWH, WWWH. Now, what that sounds like is this. I'm going to kind of do it horizontally. I'll switch back to the... I'll stand this camera. So, ready? So I'm going to do an example on the key of A. A major, this would be. So I'm on A, which is the 5th fret of the E string. I'm going to do a whole step. Now I'm on the 7th. Another whole step, which is the 9th. A half step, which is the 10th. Another whole step, which is the 12th. Another whole step, so the 14th. Another whole step, which is now the 16th. And then a half step, which would hit the 17th. Very important with the scales and with these formulas, you will always end up at the same note you started at, just an octave higher, which means it'll be the higher one in the scale. So, for example, this right here, the 5th fret, that is an A. The 17th is also an A, but it's a higher pitched A. So essentially the scale just builds you up until you get to that A and you can wrap around. So you can do that all the way up the frets, all the way up the fretboard, all of that. So let's do A minor now. So again, we're starting 5th fret of the E string. We're doing a whole step, which is the 7th, half step, the 8th, another whole step, which you on the 10th, whole step, which now puts you on the 12th, half step, puts you on the 13th, a whole step, puts you on the 15th, and then once again, you're ending on the same octave. So you're ending on that 17th fret for the full scale. Most guitarists, some people will think horizontally. Me personally, I think vertically when I play scales. So to give you a little faster of a context, this is the A major scale. And then here's the A minor scale. You notice both of them end on that note, which is a perfect octave of A. So here's the minor. And then here's the sorry, that was the major. Here's the minor. And once again, you both end there. So to kind of put this visually now, these are the breakdowns for the C major and C minor scale. So again, anything in yellow is the major. And if you look, you go whole step, and you can see the notes kind of going along. So once again, we're following this scale here. So whole step, half step, whole step, half step. There you go. For minor, we do a whole step, a half step, a whole step, half step, whole step, and whole step. And you see, they do indeed both end on the C, where they started. The C is considered the root note, and that's kind of where you build your scale out from. So that's the gist of the major minor, and you can use that as kind of your baseline to build out scales from there. For example, the harmonic minor was mentioned. Now the harmonic minor is just the minor scale, but you sharp the 7th note. So if you look, this is the exact same thing as the regular minor, but now instead of the 7th note being an A sharp, now it is just a straight up B. And that changes the whole sound. And that's kind of how you figure things out. There's a whole bunch of these variants. I do highly recommend, if you're looking to get very much into the scales and all that, picking up a book like this. This is the Guitar Grimoire. There's a lot of versions of it, a lot of re-releases of this. This is the version I have. And it is just packed, sealed with a whole bunch of scale shapes. And it'll explain how each of them work, how they were figured out. It's a great reference if you're trying to look at some cool scales and really change your playing a bunch. I recommend it. I found it out thanks to Angel Vivaldi had a post on it back on Instagram a little while ago. But yeah, that's kind of the general gist of how to think about scales and shapes and all that. Beneath the Sky asks, proper tremolo technique maybe. Now this is a fun one. So tremolo technique is something that's very dependent on the guitar player. I've seen a bunch of people play trem, and I've seen a bunch of people do it different ways. So I'm going to show you how I do it by switching to camera 2. So here we are on the close-up cam for the guitar itself. So the way I do trem, typically, and I'm sitting in classical position right now, which is why the guitar is angled a little bit more, is essentially I just kind of angle the pick a bit, put my thumb there, and I just slowly start building up. It's just a lot of hand movement, a little bit of wrist movement. But again, each person is different. Eddie Van Halen has that very famous, like, fingers out and, like, very high up tremolo picking technique. So you gotta kind of figure out for yourself. But I always recommend, keeping a solid wrist and just start alternate picking with the idea that you want to be able to trem pick. So, also the guitar's a little loud, I'm realizing. My voice is a little quiet, but essentially you want to just kind of start off alternate picking, start picking a little faster, and then eventually just get fully into it, whichever method you enjoy best. And that's kind of how you do that. Anyway, everyone, I'm going to call it there for that one. I've got a couple more questions to answer, but we'll do that in the next part of the video series. So again, if you have any questions you want to hear, feel free to leave them in the comments of the YouTube video here, or post them in Discord. If you have any questions, as well as on anything I talked about today, feel free to also leave them in the YouTube comments. I'll be doing my best to answer them. And if you really enjoy what you see here, consider subscribing. Buttons like, I don't know, somewhere around here maybe. I don't know where YouTube is anymore. If you really enjoy what you see here, consider coming through the stream. I stream 3 days a week over on twitch.tv/WaffleDragon34. So yeah, so see you guys again. I'll be doing a part 2 of this for some more questions I got to answer. We've got about 3 or 4 more to do. But in the meantime, everyone, have a great day, and I will see you on stream.